You guys were a great audience. We've seen the movie with quite a few crowds outside of Pixar, and honestly, after a while, when you show it at Pixar, nobody's laughing as much because we've seen the jokes so many times. I mean, I'm barely laughing at the movie anymore. So it's really refreshing to watch it with a fresh audience. You guys were definitely great. The one thing I remember talking about wanting for this movie is that you felt the roller coaster ride of the movie, and what that means to me is that everyone is laughing at the right places, screaming at the right places, crying at the right places, and that the emotional kind of beats are all hitting at the right time, and I really felt it with you guys, so thank you so much. I think there's probably two things I can point to of how the tone kind of came to be. I do think one part of it is, having worked on my TV show, we did 140 episodes. Ultimately, what you're doing when you have to make that many episodes is you're playing around with a lot of different genres, a lot of different tones. You're like parodying this movie, you're parodying that movie, and you start to become very versatile with working in a lot of different genres, for lack of a better word. And I think when I came to Pixar, I just kind of carried a lot of that skill set that I learned making those episodes into this movie. But I would also say that another thing is I talked a lot about, with my team, the movies I grew up loving. And the movies I remember loving as a kid were kind of hard to pinpoint. Is it a comedy? Is it a horror movie? We talked a lot about Gremlins. We talked a lot about early Tim Burton movies. Just things that, it's kind of a little bit all over the place in terms of how to feel about it, or should kids be watching this? I think it just rides a very fine line. And those were the movies I loved, and those were the movies that really informed the tone for this movie.
I would say it's about a passionate young woman who is fighting to protect a glade and stumbles upon a secret lab that has technology that allows her to project her consciousness into a robot beaver and be among animals like an animal. And I think
they stare at us blankly.
What? Okay, it's nothing like Avatar. It's nothing like Avatar. And then they go, oh, okay.
Yeah, I don't know how much of a science it is to really break down. I think a lot of it, though, comes down to Pixar as a studio being very director-driven, being very giving me the runway and the space to kind of articulate how I feel and what I want to say about the movie and the things that connect with me. And I mean, the things that are said in this movie, they are things that I believe in very wholeheartedly, And so I think a lot of it is attributed to Pixar as a studio. But I will also say that a big kind of a big component of what makes the movie what it is also the combination of the crew that we had. Everyone kind of pitches in, and as the movie goes, everyone kind of takes ownership for the movie, and they put their voice into the movie too. And they start taking my lead, but then they start building on top of that and articulating the philosophies of the movie, the themes, even sharper and better. So it's a very collaborative kind of process, and one that I can't take credit for alone. It's really something that we all kind of got together over the course of 6 years and really fine-tuned to the best version we could.
Yeah, I would say that's a luxury that we have that other studios don't have, that we have that much time and that much access to people who've done the process before, who we know have great minds for storytelling, and a whole crew who have made many, many films before, who know how to do impossible things. I was just in a presentation at Pixar, and one of the technical directors said, I think we've gotten to the place where we can make anything. And I can tell you that was not the case when I started working at Pixar. When we were making Monsters, Inc., it was like, oh my goodness, fur. How are we going to do fur? And they were doing Finding Nemo. Oh, all that water, it's going to be so hard. Now we're like, whatever the story is. And so, which is great. And so now it's really about story. And I will say again, being able to build reels and put it out there and take notes and do it again over and over and over, that's our secret. That really is.
It's just a very adult construct on top of these really goofy things, and I think that that's the reason hopefully it can appeal to children and adults, is because we're putting these very charming looking characters, which I think kids will love no matter what, but putting them into this very adult kind of serious council meeting, where there's power involved, and there's scary characters, there's bad there's politics, happening basically in front of our eyes. So to me, I think hopefully that answers your question, but that is kind of the fun of what makes it hopefully relatable to all ages.
And one thing we've realized as we've talked to everybody about what the movie means is it is also a story about power. And so when children are young, they have no power, but they have ideas. And as people are growing up, you have ideas, but you don't have the power to communicate them to a large group of people. And you can see in that moment, that's what's happening. And finally, she has power, and did things go wrong? Maybe she didn't use that power properly.
Anytime you depict nature, it's very, very hard. And the reason for that is if you just go outside and take a picture of nature, it's a mess. Like, it's just, color is everywhere. There's no organization. It's chaos. And to put that on screen and make it look natural is very, very difficult. And that was definitely one of the big ones when I came to the team with this movie. They were like, oh no, we got to put nature on the screen. I will say that the thing that guided a lot of it was the importance of character. To me, I care about obviously everything, but characters I had a very strong opinion on. And everything needed to point to the character and help us see the character, focus on what they're doing, and everything else was kind of background. And so we kind of were led by that kind of philosophy, which was just make sure the audience is looking at the character and everything else should drop away. But it doesn't mean that we can just like fudge everything in the background. People still need to feel like, oh, that feels like nature. And then the other tricky thing, just to add on top of that layer of complexity, is when we depicted nature, it can't just look photorealistic because the animals in the are so cartoony and pushed that if nature just looked like exactly like our world, it wouldn't fit in. So we actually had to caricature the backgrounds in the trees and the sticks and everything, so it had a little bit of caricature to them so that they would live with the world of these cute animals. And so all that to say, there was a lot of work involved. That's probably the biggest question of our movie, but characters really were the ones that led it all. And maybe you want to talk a little bit about the brushstroke.
Yeah, we actually created new technology for those backgrounds, so that's why they'd be happy that you noticed. It's called brushstroke technology, and what they would do is they would render the background, and then they would create these little dots from that render, and then they could use a brush to blend it. So it's not entirely impressionistic, it's not created that way. It's created with more defined lines, but then they can blur it as much or as little as possible. So each shot was addressed individually with the brushstrokes.
And there was definitely times they could turn up that brushstroke, but it then suddenly would get too impressionistic, and then your eyes would suddenly be going to the tree in the background. So that was another of the balance. It was like, how do we make sure we use that tool to push the background away, but then not draw away from the character? And that was the really tricky thing about navigating this movie. It was just all these little variables that had to be navigated.